Good afternoon, everybody. Hello and welcome to the 2020 Sizzling Summer Series sponsored by the UNMC College of Public Health, Office of Public Health Practice, and our partners, the Midwestern Public Health Training Center, the Nebraska Association of Local Health Directors, and the Nebraska Business Development Center at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. My name is Katie Brander. I am the Manager of Workforce Development and Leadership Programs in the Office of Public Health Practice, and I'm your host for this series. This summer, we have focused on the strategic skill set of change management. Over the months of June, July, and August, we've been hosting this three-part series, offering one part each month, and today is our final call of the series, focused on change and the organization. Our speaker for the series is none other than Michael Curdun. Michael is very good at managing change. He is a teacher and speaker on change management, project management, and team building through the Nebraska Business Development Center. And he leads a cybersecurity team at the Omaha Public Power District. And he's also a public healther, so we don't want to forget that. He previously worked for the Omaha Healthy Kids Alliance, and he's currently the board president of MilkWorks, which is a nonprofit community breastfeeding center in Nebraska. He is a trainer, facilitator, father, partner, instructor of both college students and two daughters as well in this global pandemic atmosphere. So we thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule this entire summer, Michael, and joining us. Thanks so much, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you. I certainly have been boning up on my first grade math skills and hope I don't embarrass myself too badly in front of my youngest daughter. So. Well, I'm really excited to finish out our summer series. It's kind of amazing to think about, how far we've come, in our journey here as we think about our first meeting in June, and we really focused on, kind of the individual, and we all were very focused there, right? And it seems relevant that we are now to the organization, and so many of the conversations that we are having within our organizations are, how do we operate in the future? What do our programs look like, long term? And how do we make those adjustments, for our people to be successful? And so I'm excited to, continue the conversation and bring it all to, full circle for us. So we're going to kind of jump in as we always do with kind of a brief connection for you guys to kind of talk about in the last 90 days, what has surprised you about your organization, right? So as we think about the beginning of the summer in June, think about all the changes that have happened, all the expectations, all the roller coasters that organizations have been through. Katie and I were talking about school starting and just thinking about, kind of all of the planning that had to go into any modality that they chose. Is just incredible, and to think about the organizational strain and the amount of change that we have. So take a moment. We're going to send you off to some quick breakout meetings to kind of introduce yourselves to each other. You'll stay with this group again, later on in the call as we typically do, and talk to us about what surprised you. Whether that was a challenge that you thought your organization was ready for, or something that really challenged your organization in some ways that made you think about how you can make that stronger in the future. Well, I like we usually do, I want to hear from you guys, because it's always the disappointing part of not being in all the breakout rooms. So hop in the chat and share what were the things that your room talked about. And I think we have a small enough group, Katie, that if somebody wanted to speak up, we probably could probably handle the extra noise.
Yes, feel free
to
unmute.
If you feel compelled to speak.
I think one of the most surprising changes that I've seen in my organization is the shift from silo to team. I think a lot of times in my particular huge agency of DHHS, there's a lot of pockets where I've done this, I'm the only one that does this, I've done it the same way, And that can often be kind of a hurdle or kind of a roadblock. And in the last 90 days, last chunk of COVID response, I've really been impressed with the amount of people that have left their comfort zone and stretched really far to lend each other a hand or pick up a task they normally wouldn't do so that somebody else has a little bit more time to do something else. It's been a really nice change, and I'm hoping that that open-minded stretch stays with us even after the response.
I think that, yeah, I mean, that's a great observation. And it's kind of interesting, you know, how, and we talked about this in the first session together, how as individuals, like, we're craving connection in very different ways now, right? We're all kind of isolated to these little 1x2 boxes. And so it kind of forces you to reach out and connect in different ways that you know, maybe when we were physically like around people, you know, that need wasn't quite there. And so, yeah, that's interesting. Maya, I think that's such an interesting conversation, and I will say that I am happy that I do not have to be in that battle zone, because I think you guys, you know, in a lot of ways are kind of definitely battling something that is much larger than yourselves, right? And that's that is always difficult, I think, for organizations to find that right line and that right balance between, you know, achieving the mission and being sensitive to what is, you know, happening in the culture. So, and Valerie, I think that's that kind of takes me back to, so I have a 6-year-old daughter, and, you know, she's in dance class, and watching, you know, her dance studio try to teach dance on Zoom just was absolutely hilarious. But, you know, I mean, I think we've all found ways to adapt. And I think, if anything, you know, the last 90 days have really shown our immense ability to adapt to challenges, and we find a way to succeed. So thank you guys. I always appreciate the conversation. So, so let's talk today about, you know, why change is so hard for organizations, right? We've kind of talked about, you know, why we as individuals struggle with change, and we talked about, you know, kind of both the psychological and biological things that that are standing in our way, and then we talked about the small groups, right? How, you know, how we can be successful within small groups, and the key role that those, you know, kind of small functional areas play in organizations is you know, nobody can take that away. But as we think about, you know, like how organizations functions, they function from, you know, different from both of the things that we've talked about so far. And so when I kind of work with organizations on change, I really talk about, you know, 4 problems that stand in our way, that organizations function very differently than we think that they should, right? So we've grown up with this idea that, you know, you know, we're going to bring this scientific mindset to everything that we do, and we want organizations to focus, you know, to function in this mechanical way, right? We're kind of assembly lines and cogs in the wheel, and everybody has a role to play, and, you know, kind of all of these very mechanical, you know, ideas get brought onto organizations, but that's not how organizations respond. Organizations are made up of biological creatures, and so they function in biological ways, and you know, and organisms respond to external stimulus sometimes in very unexpected ways in order to adapt and survive. And so organizations do the similar, right? And I think we've seen that, you know, within our organizations, right? Where if you look back over the last now, you know, 6 months that we've been, you know, kind of dealing with this crisis, we can probably look all at our organizations and find some ways where we look at it and we go, gosh, I wouldn't have thought we would have reacted and responded in that way. You know, whatever that case is. And that is a far more biological response than a mechanical, logical one. And we love to think of ourselves as logical creatures, but our emotion is strong. And when we are put to stress, that primal part of our brain takes over. And for organizations that are made up of biological creatures, we respond the same way. And so thinking about that is important, right? How would an organism respond to this change and to this external threat? And you can look at organizations very similarly. So the second item I talk about is a loss aversion, right? So we have a tendency to keep what we have rather than risk something that would be an equivalent gain, right? So if I asked all of you if you are willing to risk, $100 to make $150, right? Most of you would start asking about odds and what do I have to do? What's a skill? You would think about that potential loss far more than you'd value the potential $50 that you might gain. And that comes, from a very primal state as well for us. And so as we as organizations, right, as we're thinking about innovation and the ability to kind of move and do things in different ways, we often value and have our conversations focused around keeping the status quo, right? So we don't want to lose the status quo no matter what, even if there is an opportunity, to jump ahead in another area. We're very concerned about maintaining that status quo because of that loss aversion, which kind of plays on the third item that I talk about, which is this failure bias. We have an assumption that failure is far more likely than success, and it's embedded in the way that we think about it and the way that we value resources. And so we as organizations are much more likely to assume that when the plan went super well, that was because of some extraordinary effort by everybody involved. But when the plan failed, we often look at that kind of root cause analysis, and we devote a lot of resources to understanding the failures that we have, as opposed to having that same diligence and critical thinking around the things that went well, right? When was the last time you worked on a project and you met your goals and you stopped to examine exactly why everything went well and the plan went exactly how it was supposed to go, and everybody played the part that they were supposed to play? But when something fails, that is our automatic go-to, right? We want to examine it. We want to break it down and decompose it into the parts, and we want to understand the root cause analysis, right? I think back to the shuttle launches, right? Every time a shuttle made it into space, we didn't stop and examine what went right, but when one didn't make it into space, we definitely stopped and examined everything. And that's obviously an extreme case, but it just shows where the value proposition is for us, within organizations. We want to take time to make sure that we don't have that failure happen, versus examining the success that we have and the opportunities to grow so that we can reinforce that going forward. And then finally, I call this the golden ticket syndrome, right? A lot of times our leaders are looking for these grand, elegant solutions that are sometimes very difficult to achieve, right? So as we think about, the changes that have happened within our organizations over the last 90 days, right? The things that have been successful are probably things that built off of existing processes, small tweaks to the environment that allowed employees to continue to work, maybe adjust the way that they were working, and small changes that happened that were already built and had a structure around them, as opposed to, for many of us, thinking about uplifting everything that we do, remaking it all, and pushing it out there. But our leadership, when they think about creating change within an organization, they often think about remaking everything, right? Remaking the fundamental principles, remaking the structure, building a new framework. And so we overvalue the work and the results of that, as opposed to telling the story about the small changes that are made over time. And so that kind of leads into kind of what I want to talk about today, which is this idea of Kaizen. Kaizen is a Japanese concept, and it's two kanji put together, and that means change for good. And so this idea, is kind of embedded within Japanese culture, but it really starts to play out after World War II. And so if you think about, where Japan as a country is after World War II, many of its industrial centers are completely devastated, after years and years of war and long-term bombing. And so they are, so the United States comes in after, World War II and helps the country rebuild. And if you think about where the United States was at, kind of late 1940s, early 1950s, we had this very scientific approach to work. And so we had, kind of this value of the assembly line. We had, things like the Hawthorne studies, which are measuring, the effectiveness of work and how can we drive out waste and really get to this very, again, scientific mechanical approach to work, right? And so these two things kind of combine in this era, this idea that's embedded within Japanese culture of Kaizen, which is, kind of change for good, right? Continuous improvement, combines with this kind of remaking of their industrial base to really produce companies like Toyota, as kind of one example. And Toyota is really known for pushing the automobile industry with safety and quality, and you have other companies as well, Honda and others are all known for this quality and these innovations that are being put into their cars far ahead of American vehicles. And that's not by accident, right? It's this idea of how do we continuously improve the vehicle based off of what we're hearing and the feedback that what we're hearing from customers. And a lot of times, right, when they're hearing from their customers, they're hearing things about quality, they're hearing things about safety. And so you're building this culture and this idea of kind of feedback into that. And so as this, kind of comes ahead and comes back to the United States, and kind of put into the business context in, kind of the 80s and 90s, this idea of Kaizen starts to take hold, right? And we kind of have this lean, approach to things. And so I really love this idea. So I started out in manufacturing. My first job out of college was at a manufacturing facility. And so this lean mindset of kind of driving waste, looking at work and looking for opportunities for improvement, kind of came to me very early on and was really embedded into, kind of work for me at an early stage. And so I've kind of kept a hold of this as I've, kind of gone through my career. And it's been something that for me, I think has allowed me to work with organizations in very different ways, right? So what Kaizen is going to say is, what are the small improvements that we can make over time to make an evolutionary impact, as opposed to when we think about change right now, we really think about a revolutionary change happening within organizations. And so for me, I love bringing this idea to organizations and really talking about how do you build Kaizen into what you do. And so as we think about, Kaizen, and what that might look like for you guys within your organizations, I really challenge you to think about the small things that you do on a daily basis that are kind of pain points, right? And those are the ideas and places that you start with Kaizen. And so you see kind of the process there in front of you, but let's kind of talk about what that means, right? So Kaizen happens, when we think about a typical Kaizen event, we talk about 1 week of effort, right? So you think about what can you tackle in 1 week? You're thinking a very small business process, right? Things that might happen on a very repetitive basis, right? Maybe you're doing this 100 times a week. Maybe you're doing it, 5 times a week, 10 times a week, right? Something that you're doing very often that is going to make a huge difference when you multiply that, right? So if we can take something that takes, an hour and a half and we reduce that down to 30 minutes, right? But we're doing it multiple times in the week. Now that becomes a force multiplier for us, right? So on our first day of Kaizen, we're going to get a team together that's going to be knowledgeable about the business process. We're going to lock ourselves into a room or lock ourselves virtually into a room together now. And we're really going to understand the current state and we're going to map that out. So what does that mean, right? So this is kind of what a process map looks like in kind of the physical world. And you see there, so this is a picture of a Kaizen process a Kaizen event that I did with an organization several years ago, right? We would kind of set this up in a huge room, kind of a huge wall, and we would start kind of asking people, well, what are the steps it takes to do A, B, and C? And we would start putting sticky notes up, right? And we would start to go, okay, well, what are the inputs? What do you need to be able to execute that step? And we'd start to track those things, and those would become a different color, right? And we'd go, okay, well, what do you do with that? What becomes the output of that step, right? And so we start to create this process map, and what you're seeing here is the creation of one thing at a business, right? Now that may involve many different things, right? Many moving pieces. But you're essentially seeing the execution of one business process happen right here on the wall. And now what we can do is begin to think in day 2, how might we improve that? So now that we have a really good understanding of everything that it takes to complete that business process, what are some ideas of how to improve that? Now, we're not taking every sticky note down off the wall and relaying them out. We're saying, what are the things that we could change in very small ways in order to have the biggest impact, right? Because we want to make sure that we're getting the biggest bang for the buck, right? So what are the smallest number of changes that we can make to have the biggest impact that's possible, right? And we may not fix it all in one Kaizen event. We may say, you know what, we're going to shave, 20 minutes off, right, of an hour and a half. That's great. If we do that business process 100 times in a month, that's a huge amount of savings. That's almost one person, entire job at the organization that we've now saved. So as we think about day 3, we're really going to test that out. So we might take, so if this is, maybe we're collecting client data and getting it entered into, a database, we may map out everything that it takes to collect that information and get it into a central repository. And then in day 2, we're going to say, you know what, these are the changes that we think we can make to make that go quicker. On day 3, we're actually going to test that. Well, if we did make those changes, let's take a couple of live applications and send them through that process, right? What are those changes going to look like? What is that going to do to the rest of the players in kind of downstream implications? We're going to test it all out. That way we know that the improvements that we want to make are going to have the desired impact, right? So how many times in an organization were you asked to make a change and on day 3, you are already asking, did it have the desired impact, right? Or how many of us are being asked to make big changes and sometime in the future, we'll know whether that change was successful or not. So very different mindset, because on day 3, we may say, you know what, that didn't have the desired impact. We're going back to one of our hypotheses from day 2, and we're picking up another one to test out, right? And so on day 4, we're going to implement the future state. So if everything goes well, all the testing goes great, it has the desired impact, it saves the amount of time that we think it's going to save, we're going to implement that, right? So what does that mean? Well, documentation may need to be rewritten. People may need to be trained on the new way of doing this, right? So if we're having somebody change the way that they enter data into a database, right, we need to document that. Well, what are the changes? We probably need to pull some old documentation, out of the organization to say, you know what, we're gonna take that down. We're gonna rewrite that today. We have one day to rewrite that. So we're gonna, probably take a lot of screenshots. We're gonna document as much as we can, remake that training material so that that's really ready. And then understand, the full end-to-end spectrum of that. So are there reports that get produced? Are there notifications that get sent out? To, kind of all of those pieces we're going to think about, and we're really going to implement that. And then on day 5, we're going to push it back out to the organization and say, congratulations, there's now a new way of doing this item. And here is all the documentation. Here is some training that we're going to provide to the rest of the organization. Right? So we may have training sessions on Friday that are retraining frontline employees on how to do this new process, right? So if you think about that, this is kind of a dedicated effort, completely focused on this improvement that we're going to make. Right? And that is hard, for organizations. That is difficult for organizations to have that type of focused effort. But you're thinking about doing it for 1 week as opposed to months on months and months of time. And so we're really going to focus that and be laser focused on exactly what we're improving. And so when we talk about, you know, kind of implementing a Kaizen culture at an organization, I really talk about being successful by focusing on the 3 ways, right? The first way is to know the flow, right? So if you think about, if you're going to understand a business process, you have to understand all of it, right? We can't have somebody who understands just this piece of it, right? We have to understand the bigger picture. What is done with that after it leaves my area? Where does it go? What do those people do with it? What information gets added to it at that stage? What gets subtracted? What gets changed, right? How many of us know a business process where we get it from one team and then we make a bunch of changes because we didn't like the way that they formatted it, and we spend time changing it so that we can use it, and then we pass it to the next team and they probably do the exact same thing. Maybe they even change it back to the way the first team had it. So we need to focus on the value streams. How does work get created at our organization, right? And so a lot of organizations have a really good idea, right? People come to the front door and they ask for something, right? If we were at McDonald's, how does work get created? Well, somebody comes up to the counter, they look at the menu and they order something. Now work is created for the rest of the organization, right? So understanding those entry points are really important. How does it get delivered to the customer, right? Go back to our McDonald's answer. There are a couple of different ways, but recently we've seen them start delivery, right? So that's a whole new way to generate value to the customer. How does that impact the work that happens at a McDonald's? Second item is to understand the entire system as opposed to a specific silo, right? So how do we get out of this idea of saying, well, I'm in accounts payable, so this is my silo and this is what I need. I need it from A to B and then I'm done with it, right? How do we think about the whole organization and the flow across the whole organization? And we always want to increase the flow, right? So if something takes an hour and a half, we don't want to do a Kaizen event and now it takes an hour and 45, right? Because maybe I passed a problem downstream and now they have to deal with it and it takes them twice as long to do their work, right? We always want to increase the flow that it's happening, right? So that's important to understand the end-to-end process. The second item is to increase and amplify the feedback loops. So if you think about this, we want to make sure that as many times as possible throughout that business process that we have an opportunity to gather feedback about how it's going. How long is that taking? Are we accomplishing all of the value that we need to accomplish? And we need to increase those feedback loops at every step, right? So maybe for a lot of us, we ask for, you know, kind of a customer engagement survey, maybe after we're done. Maybe that comes, you know, maybe it's targeted to come 5 days after our appointment is made. If that's the one time that we have opportunity to ask, we may be missing a lot of opportunities along the way, right? And then also from the larger perspective, you know, of everybody that might be engaged within that process. So making sure that we're increasing that feedback loop to as many times as possible, so that as we think about creating a Kaizen culture, we have tons of material because we're gathering feedback all over the place and we understand where the pain points are. The third way is balance. So if you think about, if you took this idea of Kaizen to the extreme and you had teams out there, you know, constantly pulling apart and ripping apart business process, you know, every week and remaking it, we'd probably never get any work done, right? Because we'd always be tinkering with the system. And evolution from a biological sense doesn't work that way either, right? It happens in these moments of need within an organism. And so we have to have a similar balance, right? So we have to balance this idea of continuous experimentation with repetition and mastery, right? So we can't understand the ways that we can improve a business process until we have the repetition and mastery down, right? So until we've done something for, you know, 10,000 hours, you know, we can't be masters of the way of doing that. So how do we come into an organization and start ripping things apart if we don't fully understand it? And so we have to have that balance. We have to ask people to take risks and foster that culture of experimentation with ideas and potential thoughts. But we should always be asking ourselves, well, do we have a mastery of that business process? When was the last time it changed, right? Do we have everybody trained on how to do that? Because if we don't have people adequately trained, then the easiest intervention that we can make is to get people proper training. But if absolutely everybody understands their role within that business process, and they understand how to do their job, and they have the knowledge, then now we can start to examine it to say, okay, everybody has what they need. They have the tools at their disposal. They've been trained to do them. Now we can begin to look at the experimentation of how we can improve that process. So I want to send you to breakouts again. So we'll send you off for, let's do about 15 minutes, Katie, and give everybody a chance to kind of think about, what are some of the things that you might try to tackle with a continuous improvement mindset? What are the things that are pain points for you and your organization that you might tackle? And then start to think about, who would you need within that team? And is that something that you could do in an online space, right, with your organization to examine that? There are many ways. I showed, kind of a physical process map. There are many online tools that allow you to do this. Or, you could use something as simple as PowerPoint, right? And kind of make little boxes. We can be very, low tech on these things, right? And not let the technology stand in front of us. So we'll send you off for 15 minutes. Kind of talk and share, what are the things that you might tackle with this? And then as folks that are listening, right, if we go back to our peer coaching, what are the obstacles that they may encounter, within their organization? Help them think through, the best way to make that coalition happen. So again, I want to hear from you guys. And since we have a good sized group, why don't, if you feel compelled to speak, unmute yourself and speak to us. What did you hear from your breakout room? What did you share? Something that you heard?
We're transitioning our research studies to be online. And one thing I thought about is that all of the labs are doing things independently, and there's nobody really overseeing that the process itself is successful across all of the labs. So in the next 30 days, I suppose I might try and see if we can get somebody involved that could lead an effort to kind of bring us around that cycle in terms of bringing people together in terms of like a focus group to get the ideas for what's working or not, and then having them be committed to creating some type of evaluation metric to see what's successful for change afterwards.
I think that's a fantastic use, right? Because that's such a, who else would kind of look at the holistic problem, but it's all something that you guys are probably using very similar business process. You're probably tying into, some of the larger, systems there at the hospital and within the organization. So I love that idea. That sounds exciting. Any other thoughts?
I thought it was really interesting that in my little breakout group, we touched on the need to be small yet inclusive in order for this process to be productive. You want everybody who's got skin in the game at the table, but not so many people that we end up with more complications while trying to streamline a process. And I thought was really interesting because part of what I struggle with the most right now is that there are so many people doing all of the same thing that we don't really progress. And so I like the idea that you have to have a core set and make sure they're heard and then just move forward and make improvements that affect everybody.
And that is hard for organizations, that are just beginning this journey, right? To empower people to make changes that quickly, that makes a lot of leadership uncomfortable. And so that's certainly a challenge, but I think you're on the right point that, if we're going to make some good changes, we need to have the right people in the room that know these processes well enough, and are empowered by the organization to improve, you know, what comes out, and that we're going to commit whatever comes out of that room after 5 days. We're doing. It's not a recommendation. It's not a review process. It's not going to a committee. We're doing it. We had everybody in the room, all of the right people that could speak to that. We have the experts, you know, and management and leadership is going to give them the space and the authority to make that happen. So there are certainly some fundamental cultural pieces that you have to build before I would say, like, I wouldn't run out on Monday and be like, all right, hey, we're doing this. You know, I think a lot of people would hit a gigantic wall a few days into it.
We have to establish those relationships and those authorities so that it doesn't, because it can come across very productive and effective and positive, or it can come across as a horrific boundary bending, toe stepping endeavor, and then we all lose.
You know, and I think, yeah, I think so. So building that concept of, you know, hey, there are probably 1,000 problems at your organization. How are you going to tackle all 1,000? It's not from your leadership level, right? It's going to be from the folks that are doing that work, that know that work. And some of this could happen in very small ways that, you know, nobody even needs to know, right? Kind of how the sausage is made, right? There's probably a lot of people in the organization that would see a change in, and all they would see is the end result. They were like, wow, that used to take a week to get that information back from your department, and now it takes a couple of days. They'd be like, I don't care what you did, like, nice job. You know, and you could say, oh, well, you know, we took on this idea of Kaizen, and here's what we did. And, you know, that's kind of the fun way of doing it. So, you know, so I always talk to organizations about kind of starting small. So if you kind of have a team, there are some things that you can do within your team that you can implement cultural things like that. You know, so you know, I would encourage all of you to kind of start small and build the momentum, right? Get a couple of wins under your belt before you go out on your roadshow. So, well, we are at 4 o'clock. So I would love to hear from all of you, but I want to be you know, respectful of all of your time. And so I will just say, I'll hang on the line if anybody, you know, wants to ask questions or anything like that. But I will just say thank you. You know, thank you to Katie and you know, her team for putting this together. It's been fantastic, you know, meeting a lot of you and hearing from you guys over the course of the summer. And I will just say, you know, I'm in awe of the work that all of you do. And so I was honored to, you know, kind of meet all of you guys and hear of the fantastic work that you guys are doing, because it really is truly making a difference right now. And that is amazing. So keep it up. Thank you. And I hope to hear from you guys in the future. If you ever have anything, you know, please let me know. I love talking about this stuff. So.
Thanks so much, Michael. And thank you everybody for participating in part 3 of our Sizzling Summer Series, Change in the Organization. And thank you for participating this summer in the summer long series. It was a pleasure to host this, and we look forward to bringing the Sizzling Summer Series back again in 2021. So take care, everybody, and goodbye.